8 ordinary pennies, minted across decades, each worth millions today. $44M, $40 million, $39 million, $38 million, $37 million, $34 million, $33 million, $24 million. Hidden fortunes hiding in plain sight, small coins that turned into unbelievable treasures. Could one of these life-changing coins already be in your pocket? Welcome back to the channel. The coin you have ignored your entire life could be worth more than private islands, supercars, and generational empires combined, because buried inside the ordinary brown change of America's past lies the 1979 1-cent USA coin, a penny struck with a face value of just 1 cent that has shocked collectors, investors, historians, and everyday people alike, with reported valuations reaching an unbelievable $38 million, a number so extreme it rewrites what we think money can become over time. And this is not about gold, not about silver, not about ancient empires or lost pirate treasure, but about a simple Lincoln penny that once passed through grocery stores, school lunch lines, parking meters, and dusty jars without anyone noticing that history was quietly forming in copper. And the power of this coin begins with the year itself, because 1979 sits at a crossroads of American minting history where composition changes, die varieties striking, pressures, and transitional errors created perfect conditions for anomalies that today define the upper ceiling of coin valuation. And while millions of ordinary 1979 1-cent coins exist, a microscopic fraction were produced with characteristics so rare that they crossed from pocket change into myth, and collectors don't pay $38 million for age alone, they pay for a collision of scarcity, condition, provenance, an error so dramatic that it cannot be recreated, duplicated, or faked, and that is exactly where the legendary 1979 1-cent enters the conversation, because this coin is tied to stories of experimental dies, off-metal strikes, doubled elements, transitional planchets, and preservation states so pristine they appear frozen in time. And when such a coin surfaces, it doesn't behave like money anymore, it behaves like a historical artifact. A financial singularity that collapses logic and forces auction rooms into silence. And what makes this story viral isn't just the number 38 million, but the idea that this value was hidden in plain sight, that someone somewhere unknowingly held wealth greater than lottery jackpots in the palm of their hand. And that realization hits harder because the penny is the lowest denomination, the most dismissed unit of currency, the coin people leave behind and take a penny trays without a second thought. Yet history has a habit of hiding its greatest prizes in the most underestimated places, and the Lincoln cent series has repeatedly proven this pattern. But the 1979 issue stands out because it represents a modern-era miracle rather than an ancient relic, meaning the possibility still feels alive, still feels reachable, still feels like something that could happen again. And that psychological proximity is what turns this coin into a viral phenomenon across search engines, social media, and late-night conversations. Because unlike medieval coins locked in museums, 1979 pennies were produced in staggering quantities and distributed nationwide, creating a needle-in-a-haystack scenario that fuels endless searching. And while the average example is worth face value, the ultra-rare variants operate on a completely different plane, with collectors hunting for signs invisible to the untrained eye, things like unusual weight, incorrect metal composition, subtle doubling in the date or lettering, mint anomalies that occurred for fractions of seconds during production. And when these errors coincide with extraordinary preservation, the market responds not with hundreds or thousands but with millions, and the $38 million figure attached to the most extreme 1979 1-cent examples represents the ceiling of what is theoretically possible when every variable aligns perfectly. And even if only one such coin exists, its existence reshapes the value perception of every penny dated that year, and that ripple effect is what drives global interest, because hope is a powerful economic force, and hope tells people that value is not always announced. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it hides, sometimes it waits decades to reveal itself, and the 1979 1-cent waited patiently while inflation eroded purchasing power and digital money took over, only to emerge as a reminder that physical currency can still outperform stocks, real estate, and businesses under the right circumstances. And this is where the story becomes bigger than coins, because it challenges the idea that wealth creation must be complex, that it requires insider access or massive capital, when in reality some of the most explosive value stories begin with something small, overlooked, and ordinary, and that narrative resonates globally because it is universal. Everyone has held a penny, everyone has dismissed one. And that shared experience makes the transformation from 1 cent to 38 million emotionally explosive, and auction history shows that when such coins appear, bidding wars are not about logic, they are about legacy, about owning a piece of history that can never be replaced, about status within elite collecting circles where rarity is the ultimate currency, and once a benchmark sale or valuation is established, it echoes forever, anchoring the legend of the coin and cementing its place in financial folklore. And that is why the 1979 1-cent USA coin continues to dominate search trends, video platforms, and collector forums, because it sits at the intersection of realism and fantasy, grounded in an ordinary year yet elevated by extraordinary circumstances. And whether the $38 million valuation represents a realized sale, a private transaction, or a theoretical pinnacle, its impact is the same. It transforms perception, it turns pennies into possibilities, and it keeps people searching drawers, jars, rolls, and inherited collections with renewed intensity, because the next discovery could rewrite someone's life overnight, and that potential is intoxicating. And as long as one person believes that a single cent can become generational wealth, the story will never die. It will be retold, reshared, reimagined, and rediscovered by new audiences. And that is the real power of the 1979 1-cent USA coin, not just its rumored price tag, but the way it proves that value is not fixed, it evolves, it concentrates, it explodes. And sometimes it hides inside the smallest things waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Next, 1981 1-cent USA coin. Imagine discovering that a single copper coin once ignored on a sidewalk or buried at the bottom of a forgotten drawer could carry a value so extreme it rivals private jets, luxury skyscrapers, and entire family dynasties. Because the 1981 1-cent USA coin represents one of the most shocking transformations in monetary history. A penny created with a face value of just 1 cent that has entered elite collector lore with valuations reaching an astonishing $34 million. And this isn't fantasy or hype alone, but the result of a perfect storm of minting circumstances, transitional metal history, microscopic errors, and survival odds so low they redefine rarity. Because 1981 was not an ordinary year in American coin production, it was a pressure point era where the United States Mint was grappling with metal costs, composition transitions, experimental strikes, and efficiency changes that quietly produced anomalies never meant to exist. And when such anomalies escape into circulation and survive untouched for decades, they cease to be currency and become historical assets. And that is exactly what happened with the most extraordinary examples of the 1981 1-cent coins that should have been melted, corrected, or destroyed but instead slipped into the world unnoticed, waiting for time and knowledge to unlock their true worth. And the power of this story lies in its closeness to the present, because 1981 is not ancient, it is within living memory, meaning these pennies pass through modern hands through supermarkets, gas stations, school cafeterias, and everyday transactions, silently carrying potential wealth beyond imagination, and collectors understand that the value of a coin is not dictated by its denomination but by its impossibility. And the 1981 1-cent reached the $34 million tier because it represents an intersection that cannot be recreated, involving ultra-rare transitional compositions, misaligned dies, doubled features, off-metal strikes, and condition states so flawless they defy probability. And when experts encounter such a coin, the conversation immediately shifts from price guides to legacy, because at that level money becomes secondary to ownership of a once-in-a-generation artifact. And what makes this coin dominate attention is the psychological contrast between its humble appearance and its elite valuation, because the human mind struggles to reconcile how something so small and common can evolve into something so powerful, and that tension fuels curiosity, shares, searches, and obsession, as people begin to wonder if value has been hiding around them all along, and history shows that the Lincoln Cent series has repeatedly produced these moments of disbelief. But the 1981 issue is particularly electrifying because it exists at the edge of compositional change. When copper content, planchet sourcing, and production efficiency collided, creating opportunities for errors that were instantly corrected once discovered, making surviving examples almost mythical, and when a coin from this environment surfaces in extraordinary condition, untouched by circulation, oxidation, or cleaning, it becomes a time capsule, preserving a mistake frozen in metal, and mistakes are where the biggest money lives in numismatics. Because perfection can be repeated but errors cannot, and the $34 million valuation associated with the most extreme 1981 1-cent examples reflects not just what has been paid or projected, but what collectors are willing to do to secure something that will never appear again. And in high-end collecting circles, uniqueness outranks logic, because wealth at that level seeks meaning, not utility, and owning a coin that rewrites value expectations delivers exactly that. And the legend of the 1981 1-cent continues to grow because every year more people realize that rarity does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides inside ordinary systems, sometimes it passes unnoticed through millions of hands, and sometimes it waits decades for the right eyes to recognize it, and this waiting period amplifies its mystique, because the longer a coin remains undiscovered, the more improbable its survival becomes, and improbability is the engine of value. And when stories of 8-figure pennies circulate, they don't just attract collectors. They attract dreamers, investors, historians, and everyday people who suddenly see possibility in the mundane. And that is why searches for rare pennies, 1981 cent errors, and $1 million coins never slow down, because hope is renewable, and the idea that one small object can change a life overnight is irresistible. And whether the $34 million figure represents a realized transaction, a private valuation, or a theoretical apex, its influence is undeniable, because it sets a ceiling, and ceilings redefine markets, and once a ceiling exists, everything below it rises in perceived importance, turning ordinary pennies into potential lottery tickets of history. And this shift in perception is what keeps the 1981 1-cent relevant, viral, and endlessly discussed, because it proves that value is not always tied to size, usefulness, or intention. Sometimes value is born from error, survival, and time is the greatest multiplier of all, transforming overlooked objects into irreplaceable assets. And as long as one 1981 penny exists that defies expectation, the story will continue to spread, inspiring people to look closer, think deeper, and question what else they may have overlooked. Next, 1982 1-cent USA coin. The moment people realize that a tiny brown coin once dismissed as worthless pocket clutter can rival the wealth of celebrities, corporations, and entire investment portfolios, their understanding of money collapses. And that exact collapse is what surrounds the 1982 1-cent USA coin. A penny born with a face value of just 1 cent that has carved out a legendary place in financial history with valuations reaching an astonishing $33 million. A figure so extreme it forces the world to reconsider what rarity truly means, because 1982 was not just another year for American coinage, it was a turning point, a fracture in minting history where metal composition, production urgency, and economic pressure collided, creating conditions that would never exist again in the same way. And that collision is the reason the 1982 penny stands among the most valuable coins ever discussed, because this was the year the United States transitioned from primarily copper pennies to zinc-based cents, and that single change unleashed chaos at the mint level, with multiple compositions, weights, dies, and strike variations occurring simultaneously, some intentional, some accidental, and some never meant to leave the facility at all. And when mistakes happen during transitions, they don't just create errors, they create legends, because transitional errors are finite, locked to a specific moment in time, and once the process stabilizes, the window closes forever, meaning any surviving anomalies instantly become irreplaceable. And that is where the multi-million-dollar 1982 1-cent enters the story, because among the billions produced, a microscopic number emerged with impossible characteristics, coins struck on the wrong metal, coins bearing combinations that should not coexist, coins preserved in near-perfect condition despite overwhelming odds. And these are the factors that transform a penny into a financial artifact, and collectors, at the highest level, understand that money chases stories more than objects, and the story of the 1982 penny is explosive because it represents a system in flux, a year when the rules changed, and anything created during rule changes carries immense historical gravity, and when such a coin survives untouched, uncirculated, and undiscovered for decades, it accumulates not just rarity but mystique. And mystique multiplies value faster than metal ever could, and the $33 million valuation attached to the most extreme examples of the 1982 1 cent is not about copper versus zinc alone, it is about impossibility, about holding proof that even the most controlled systems can produce miracles by accident, and that idea resonates far beyond numismatics, because it mirrors life itself, where the greatest outcomes often emerge from moments of disorder. And that emotional connection is why stories of million-dollar pennies spread faster than stock tips or real estate secrets. Because everyone understands a penny, everyone has held one, and everyone has ignored one, making the transformation from 1 cent to 8 figures feel personal, almost confrontational, as if value itself has been hiding in plain sight while people looked elsewhere, and the 1982 penny magnifies this feeling because it existed during modern times, not ancient history, meaning someone alive today could have spent, saved, or lost what would later be considered generational wealth, and that proximity fuels obsession, because it suggests the door may not be fully closed yet, and collectors, investors, and everyday people alike chase that possibility relentlessly, searching rolls, jars, estates, and forgotten collections, hoping to spot the subtle differences that separate a common coin from a historic outlier. And what elevates the 1982 1 cent above most others is the sheer number of variations produced that year, creating confusion, overlap, and opportunity, because when multiple compositions exist simultaneously, mistakes slip through, and mistakes are where the money lies, and when those mistakes intersect with pristine preservation, the result is a coin that no price guide can truly contain, forcing the market to respond emotionally rather than logically, and at the highest auction levels, logic dissolves completely, replaced by competition, prestige, and the desire to own something that defines an era, and owning a legendary 1982 penny is not about spending it, it is about securing a permanent position in history, because such coins do not trade hands casually, they move through whispers, private deals, and elite circles where value is measured in legacy rather than liquidity, and once a coin achieves an 8-figure reputation, its story becomes self-sustaining, because every mention reinforces belief, every belief reinforces demand. And demand without replacement drives prices into realms that seem impossible to outsiders, and that is why the 1982 1 cent continues to dominate conversations, searches, and viral content, because it proves that value is not static, it evolves with knowledge, and as knowledge spreads, what was once overlooked becomes priceless. And this realization changes behavior, causing people to slow down, to look twice, to question assumptions, and that shift in awareness is powerful, because it turns passive observers into active seekers, and the longer the legend survives, the more powerful it becomes. Because time validates rarity, and rarity validates price, and price cements legend, creating a loop that keeps the story alive across generations. And the $33 million figure attached to the most extraordinary 1982 1 cent is not just a number, it is a symbol, representing the absolute ceiling of what a penny can become when history, error, and survival converge. And as long as that ceiling exists, every ordinary penny carries a shadow of possibility, reminding the world that greatness does not always announce itself, sometimes it whispers from the smallest places, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The idea that a single brown penny could quietly outperform luxury mansions, tech empires, and lifetime savings sounds impossible until the 1982 1 cent USA coin enters the conversation, because this was the exact year when American money changed forever, and inside that change was hidden one of the most powerful value explosions in modern history. A penny created with a face value of 1 cent that later shocked the world with valuations climbing as high as $33 million. And the reason this coin became legendary is not luck alone but a rare collision of economics, urgency, metal scarcity, human error, and time, because 1982 was the year the United States Mint was forced to abandon traditional copper pennies due to rising metal costs, triggering a rushed transition to zinc-based planchets, and during that transition chaos quietly entered the production line. With multiple compositions, weights, die pairings, and striking conditions all operating at once, creating a once-in-history window where mistakes were not just possible but inevitable. And when systems rush, history leaks through the cracks. And that is exactly what happened when a microscopic number of pennies were struck in ways that should never have existed, coins that violated internal rules, coins that carried the wrong metal for the wrong time, coins that slipped past quality control and entered circulation unnoticed. And what makes the 1982 penny so emotionally explosive is that it is not ancient, it is modern, meaning these coins pass through everyday hands, grocery stores, school cafeterias, parking meters, and gas stations, silently carrying potential wealth greater than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. And that realization alone is enough to stop anyone in their tracks, because it forces a confrontation with how often value is dismissed simply because it looks ordinary. And collectors know that rarity is not always visible, sometimes it exists at the molecular level, measured in weight, density, and composition, and in 1982 those differences meant everything, because a penny struck on the wrong metal during a transition year is not just an error, it is a historical document, proof of a moment when the rules broke, and the rules breaking is where the biggest money lies, because perfection can be repeated but mistakes cannot, and once the transition ended, the door closed forever, freezing the number of possible anomalies at an unchangeable count, and scarcity locked in time is the purest form of value, and when such a coin also survives decades without damage, cleaning, corrosion, or circulation wear, it becomes nearly untouchable in worth, because survival against overwhelming odds multiplies rarity beyond math, and this is why the most extreme 1982 1-cent examples entered elite valuation territory, with figures reaching $33 million not because of hype alone but because of impossibility, because no mint can recreate that moment, no technology can duplicate that exact error, and no amount of money can manufacture authenticity, and once collectors recognize something as truly irreplaceable, price becomes irrelevant, replaced by competition, prestige, and legacy, and at that level auctions are no longer about buying a coin, they are about securing a permanent position in history. And the legend of the 1982 penny spreads so fast because everyone understands a penny, everyone has ignored one, everyone has dropped one without caring, making the transformation from 1 cent to generational wealth feel personal and unsettling, as if value itself has been hiding in plain sight while the world looked elsewhere, and that psychological shock is why stories of million-dollar pennies outperform stock tips and business advice, because they attack assumptions, they rewrite beliefs, and they plant a dangerous idea in the mind that maybe extraordinary value doesn't always require extraordinary beginnings, and the 1982 1 cent embodies that idea perfectly, because it was born during a moment of pressure, change, and compromise, not luxury or intention, and that makes it relatable as well as powerful, and as knowledge spreads, perception shifts, turning once forgotten pennies into objects of obsession, with people searching jars, rolls, inherited collections, and old drawers, hoping to spot the subtle differences that separate common change from historic fortune, and even though only a microscopic number will ever qualify, the possibility alone keeps the story alive, because hope is renewable and curiosity is unstoppable, and as long as one authenticated 1982 penny exists that defies expectation, the legend will continue to grow, passed from generation to generation as proof that value is not fixed, it evolves with understanding, and sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest surprises. Next, 1962 1-cent USA coin. A single penny quietly resting in the past can carry more financial power than skyscrapers, corporations, and entire lifetimes of labor, and that truth explodes into view the moment the 1962 1-cent USA coin is mentioned, because this unassuming copper cent, born with a face value of just 1 cent, has become one of the most astonishing value stories ever recorded, with legendary valuations reaching an unbelievable $44 million, a number so extreme. It forces the world to question everything it believes about money, rarity, and overlooked history, because 1962 was not just another year in American coinage, it was a moment of precision, pressure, and silent complexity inside the United States Mint, a year when billions of pennies were struck flawlessly while a microscopic handful emerged carrying characteristics so rare, so perfectly preserved, and so historically significant that they escaped the ordinary destiny of circulation and entered the realm of financial myth. And the power of the 1962 1 cent begins with its era, because this was a time before digital money, before automated quality control reached modern levels, when human judgment, mechanical tolerances, and material sourcing created subtle inconsistencies that today are impossible to recreate, and collectors understand that coins from such periods are not just currency. They are industrial artifacts, frozen evidence of how money was physically made, and when an anomaly from that system survives in pristine condition, it becomes priceless, and the most extraordinary 1962 pennies did exactly that, slipping past inspection, entering the world, and somehow avoiding damage, corrosion, cleaning, and where for decades, an act of survival so unlikely it multiplies rarity beyond simple numbers, and rarity is the foundation of extreme value. Because while millions of 1962 pennies exist, only a vanishingly small number possess the exact combination of strike quality, metal purity, die characteristics, and preservation state required to reach the highest tier of valuation, and when these factors align perfectly, the market responds not with hundreds or thousands but with millions, because at that level collectors are not buying copper, they are buying impossibility. And the $44 million valuation associated with the most elite examples of the 1962 1 cent reflects the absolute ceiling of what happens when history, scarcity, and condition collide, and this story spreads so powerfully because it attacks the deepest assumption people have about value, that small things are worth less, when in reality value is determined by scarcity and story, not size or intention, and the penny is the most underestimated object in American life, routinely ignored, dropped, and discarded, making its transformation into generational wealth emotionally explosive, because it suggests that fortune does not always announce itself, sometimes. It waits quietly while the world looks away, and the 1962 penny embodies that idea perfectly, because during its time it was nothing special, just another cent in circulation, passed from hand to hand without recognition, yet hidden among them were pieces that would later command attention from the most powerful collectors on earth. And what elevates this coin even further is the historical stability of the era, because unlike transition years filled with obvious chaos, 1962 appears calm on the surface, making its rare anomalies even more shocking, because they prove that even in controlled environments, perfection is an illusion, and where perfection fails, opportunity is born, and collectors chase those failures relentlessly, because they cannot be repeated, and once the window closes, it closes forever, locking the supply at an unchangeable number. And fixed supply with rising demand is the most powerful engine of price escalation ever created, and as knowledge spreads, demand intensifies, because people begin to understand what they once ignored, and understanding transforms perception, turning pennies into potential fortunes, and this shift fuels endless searching, with people examining old jars, inherited collections, and forgotten rolls, hoping to discover something history hid from everyone else. And even though the odds are microscopic, the possibility alone keeps the legend alive. Because hope does not require probability, it only requires belief, and the belief that a single cent can become $44 million is enough to captivate millions of minds, and at the highest levels of collecting, coins like the elite 1962 penny are not traded openly, they move quietly through private negotiations, whispered deals, and elite circles where value is measured not in spending power but in legacy. Because owning such a coin means owning a permanent place in financial history, something no amount of money can replicate once it is gone, and that is why price guides fail at this level, Because you cannot quantify desire for the irreplaceable, and when collectors compete for something that will never appear again, logic dissolves, replaced by emotion, prestige, and the need to secure immortality through ownership, and the $44 million figure becomes less shocking when viewed through that lens, because it represents not copper but time itself, compressed into a single object, and time is the most valuable resource of all, and as years pass, the story of the 1962 1 cent only grows stronger, because each passing decade reduces the chance that another perfect example will surface, tightening scarcity even further, and this self-reinforcing cycle ensures that the legend will outlive generations, passed down as proof that extraordinary value can emerge from the most ordinary places, and that realization changes behavior, causing people to slow down, to look twice, to question what else they may have dismissed without understanding, and that shift in awareness is the true legacy of the 1962 penny, because it teaches that history hides in plain sight, waiting for the moment when knowledge unlocks worth. And as this legend deepens, it becomes clear that the true power of the 1962 1 cent USA coin is not just its rumored $44 million valuation but the way it rewires how people understand wealth. Because this penny proves that value is not always created by intention but often by accident preserved by time. And when collectors analyze the most elite 1962 examples, they are not simply weighing copper or counting mintages. They are decoding a moment frozen in metal where tolerances, human oversight, and mechanical precision briefly misaligned, producing results that no modern process can ever recreate. And that inability to recreate is the heartbeat of extreme value, because reproducibility kills rarity and rarity is the oxygen of price. And in 1962 the minting process still relied on equipment and inspection standards that allowed microscopic differences to pass unnoticed, differences so subtle they meant nothing at the time yet mean everything today. And when one of those pennies survives without scratches, corrosion, cleaning, or circulation wear, it becomes a statistical impossibility layered on top of an already rare event, multiplying desirability beyond simple math. And this is why high-level collectors speak about coins like the 1962 cent with reverence rather than excitement, because excitement fades but reverence endures. And reverence is what sustains eight-figure valuations across generations, and as stories of these coins circulate, they don't just attract seasoned numismatists, they pull in investors from art, real estate, and luxury assets who recognize a familiar pattern, the pattern where fixed supply meets rising global demand, and once global demand enters a market with no possibility of expansion, prices detach from conventional anchors and begin to orbit reputation instead. And the reputation of the 1962 penny is anchored in its quietness, because unlike flashy gold coins or commemorative issues, it looks ordinary, almost invisible, and that invisibility makes its story more powerful, because it reinforces the idea that the world is full of overlooked value waiting for the right lens, and this realization changes how people interact with objects, money, and history itself, creating a mindset where attention becomes a form of wealth, because those who look closer see more. And the legend of the 1962 penny rewards that mindset, reminding everyone that history does not always announce itself loudly, sometimes it whispers through the smallest things, and as decades pass the chance of another perfect example surfacing shrinks toward zero, tightening scarcity and strengthening belief. And belief is what ultimately drives markets at the highest level, because when enough people agree that something matters, its value becomes self-sustaining. And the $44 million figure attached to the most extraordinary 1962 1 cent is not just a price, it is a symbol of what happens when time, rarity, and human curiosity intersect, and that symbol continues to inspire searching, learning, and reevaluation of what we already own. And if this continuation deepened your understanding of how a single cent can become a piece of financial legend. Next, 1990 61 cent USA coin. The moment anyone realizes that a penny from the modern era, a coin so recent it feels ordinary and forgettable, can carry a value rivaling luxury estates, elite art collections, and corporate fortunes, the entire idea of money is shaken, and that shock begins with the 1990 61 cent USA coin. A penny struck in Denver with a face value of just 1 cent that has stunned the collecting world with valuations reaching an extraordinary $24 million. A number that sounds unreal precisely because 1996 does not feel distant, ancient, or mysterious, yet that closeness is what makes this coin so powerful, because it proves that history does not only belong to the distant past, it is still forming, still hiding, still passing unnoticed through everyday hands, and the 1996 penny represents a perfect example of how modern minting, despite advanced technology, can still produce anomalies so rare that they redefine value, because during the mid-1990s the United States Mint was producing coins at massive scale, under intense efficiency demands, with high-speed presses and tight tolerances designed to eliminate variation. Yet paradoxically it is within such tightly controlled systems that the rarest mistakes become most valuable, because when an error survives a system built to destroy errors, its rarity multiplies exponentially. And collectors understand that survival against intention is the purest form of scarcity, and the 1996 D1 cent achieved legendary status because a microscopic number of coins emerged with characteristics that should never have existed together. Anomalies in strike, die state, alignment, or metal behavior that escaped detection and entered circulation or storage unnoticed. And what elevates these coins beyond curiosity into 8-figure territory is not just the error itself but the condition in which it survives. Because modern coins are especially vulnerable to damage, meaning finding a flawless survivor decades later is statistically shocking, and when such a coin surfaces in pristine state, it does not behave like currency anymore. It becomes evidence, proof that even the most advanced systems can fail in beautiful, valuable ways, and the $24 million valuation attached to the most elite examples of the 1996 penny reflects that proof. Because collectors are not paying for copper plating or zinc cores, they are paying for the impossible combination of modern origin and extreme rarity, and that combination is intoxicating, because it suggests that value has not been fully harvested from the modern world yet, that there are still undiscovered anomalies hiding in plain sight, and this idea spreads fast, because it is hopeful. It suggests that fortune is not locked away in museums but scattered across time, waiting to be noticed, and the Denver Mint mark adds another layer to the story. Because mint-specific anomalies create narrower windows of possibility, tightening supply even further, and when supply tightens around an already rare event, prices do not rise gradually, they leap, because demand is global and supply is effectively non-existent, and at that level, coins are no longer compared to other coins, they are compared to art, to artifacts, to one-of-one historical moments, and ownership becomes about identity and legacy rather than profit. And this is why stories of the 1996 penny resonate so deeply, because they challenge the assumption that modern equals common, when in reality modern systems can produce rarities just as extreme as ancient ones, and perhaps even more shocking because we believe we understand them, and belief is often what blinds us to value. And the idea that a penny from the 1990s could quietly transform into a $24 million artifact forces a reevaluation of how often value is dismissed simply because it looks familiar, and that reevaluation changes behavior, causing people to slow down, to look closer, to question what else they may have overlooked, and this shift in awareness is what keeps the legend of the 1996 1 cent alive, because as knowledge spreads, perception shifts, and perception is the gateway to demand, and demand without replacement drives prices into realms that feel unbelievable until they are accepted as reality, and once a valuation benchmark is established at the highest level, it becomes a permanent reference point, anchoring the coin's place in history and ensuring that its story will be retold for generations. And even if only a handful of people ever see such a coin in person, millions will be inspired by the idea behind it, the idea that extraordinary value can exist inside ordinary things, and that inspiration is powerful, because it keeps curiosity alive, and curiosity is what uncovers history's hidden treasures, and as years pass, the odds of another flawless 1996 penny surfacing only shrink, tightening scarcity and strengthening belief, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where legend fuels demand and demand fuels legend, and the $24 million figure becomes less shocking when understood as the price of impossibility, because impossibility cannot be manufactured, it can only be discovered, and once discovered, it becomes untouchable. And the deeper collectors dive into the story of the 1990 61-cent USA coin, the clearer it becomes that its power does not come from age but from contradiction, because everything about this penny contradicts what people believe about modern money, modern production, and modern value, and that contradiction is exactly why the $24 million valuation refuses to fade away. Because modern coins are supposed to be predictable, uniform, and disposable, yet this penny escaped all three categories at once, and when predictability collapses, value rushes in, because uncertainty is where rarity is born, and rarity is where extreme money lives, and the 1990 60 penny exists in that narrow space where technology and human limitation intersected, where high-speed presses, massive output demands, and microscopic tolerances created conditions so precise that any deviation became astronomically rare. And when one of those deviations survived without damage for decades, it effectively became a statistical miracle, and collectors at the highest level understand statistics deeply, which is why they are willing to place 8-figure numbers on objects that outsiders see as insignificant, because they are not buying metal, they are buying probability collapsed into certainty, and certainty at that level is priceless. And what makes this story even more powerful is that the mid-1990s were a time of economic optimism and expansion, when few people were preserving pennies carefully. Meaning survival rates for pristine examples are far lower than most realize, and that survival gap magnifies rarity even further, pushing elite examples into a category where comparison becomes impossible, and when comparison disappears, price becomes philosophical rather than practical, driven by questions of legacy, permanence, and historical ownership. And this is why the most valuable 1990 60 pennies are rarely discussed openly, because at that level discretion replaces publicity, and value moves quietly through private negotiations rather than public auctions, reinforcing mystique and strengthening belief. And belief is the invisible force that sustains extreme valuations across time, because once enough influential collectors agree that something matters, its importance becomes self-reinforcing, and the story of this penny continues to spread because it touches a universal nerve. The idea that something ordinary today can become extraordinary tomorrow, and that idea refuses to let people look at money the same way again, because it introduces doubt into assumptions, and doubt opens the door to curiosity, and curiosity drives discovery, and discovery is what keeps history alive. And every year that passes without another confirmed example surfacing tightens the narrative further, shrinking the perceived supply and increasing confidence that what already exists may be all that ever will. And when finality enters the equation, value accelerates, because finality cannot be negotiated with, and the $24 million figure attached to the most extreme 1990 61 cent is not just a number but a warning, a reminder that value does not always align with appearance, that systems can produce miracles accidentally, and that attention itself can be a form of wealth, because those who look closer see what others miss, and as long as people continue to overlook the ordinary, legends like this will continue to emerge, reshaping markets, rewriting assumptions, and proving that even the smallest objects can carry the weight of history. Next, 1971 1-cent USA coin. The moment anyone truly understands that a single penny from the early 1970s can outweigh luxury mansions, global businesses, and entire lifetimes of earnings, the meaning of money itself begins to fracture, and that fracture opens wide when the 1971 1-cent USA coin enters the story, because this small copper coin, created with a face value of just 1 cent, has become one of the most astonishing value legends in modern numismatic history, carrying valuations that reach an unbelievable $39 million, a number so large it feels disconnected from reality until the deeper truth is revealed, because 1971 was not an ordinary year in American coinage, it was a period of quiet tension beneath the surface, a time when the United States Mint was operating under economic pressure, metal cost concerns, aging equipment, and evolving production standards, creating a perfect environment where microscopic irregularities could be borne without immediate detection, and collectors understand that these transitional pressures are where history leaks into objects, because systems under strain do not behave perfectly, and perfection breaking is where rarity is born, and rarity is the foundation of extreme value. And while billions of 1971 pennies were produced for everyday use, only a vanishingly small number emerged carrying characteristics so unusual, so precisely preserved, and so historically significant that they crossed the invisible line between currency and artifact. And what elevates the 1971 1 cent into the $39 million tier is not a single factor but a convergence, because high-end value in coins is never accidental, it is built from layers, including striking anomalies, die characteristics, metal purity, planchet behavior, and most importantly survival in pristine condition against overwhelming odds. Because a rare error damaged is interesting, but a rare error preserved perfectly is transformative, and the most elite 1971 pennies represent exactly that transformation, coins that slipped through quality control, entered the world unnoticed, and somehow avoided circulation where corrosion, cleaning, and loss for decades, an act of survival so unlikely it multiplies rarity beyond simple calculation. And collectors at the highest level do not think in terms of face value or metal content, they think in terms of impossibility, because impossibility cannot be recreated, and once something is proven impossible to reproduce, it becomes immune to comparison, and immunity to comparison is what allows prices to reach levels that feel surreal, and the $39 million valuation associated with the most extraordinary 1971 1 cent examples reflects this reality, because at that level buyers are not purchasing copper. They are securing ownership of a moment in time that can never exist again, and ownership of that kind carries power beyond money, because it confers legacy, permanence, and status within circles where rarity is the ultimate currency. And what makes this story spread so aggressively is the psychological contrast between what the coin looks like and what it represents. Because the penny is the most dismissed object in American life, routinely ignored, dropped, and discarded. And the idea that such an object could quietly transform into generational wealth feels almost confrontational, as if value itself has been hiding in plain sight while people looked elsewhere. And the 1971 penny intensifies that feeling because it belongs to a familiar era, not ancient history, meaning these coins pass through ordinary hands, grocery stores, school lunch lines, and gas stations, silently carrying potential wealth beyond imagination, and that realization is unsettling. Because it forces a reevaluation of how often opportunity is missed simply because it does not announce itself, and collectors know that the greatest rarities often come from stable-looking years rather than obvious transition periods, because stability creates complacency, and complacency allows anomalies to escape notice, and 1971 was exactly that kind of year, outwardly routine yet internally complex, producing coins that appeared ordinary but were anything but, and once those anomalies were discovered decades later, their value exploded. Because time had already done its work, reducing the chance of additional discoveries and locking scarcity into place. And scarcity fixed in time is the most powerful driver of long-term value, because demand can grow but supply cannot, and as knowledge spreads, demand inevitably grows, drawing in not just traditional collectors but investors from art, luxury assets, and alternative markets who recognize the familiar pattern of finite supply meeting global attention, and once that pattern is recognized, prices detach from logic and begin to orbit reputation instead, and the reputation of the 1971 1 cent is built on contradiction, the contradiction of being both ordinary and extraordinary, modern and legendary, small and immense in value, and that contradiction is irresistible to the human mind because it challenges assumptions and invites curiosity, and curiosity fuels obsession, and obsession keeps legends alive, and as years pass without new discoveries, belief strengthens, because absence confirms rarity, and rarity confirms price, creating a self-reinforcing cycle that pushes elite examples further into untouchable territory, and the $39 million figure becomes less shocking when understood not as payment for a coin but as payment for certainty, certainty that this object cannot be replaced, duplicated, or improved upon, and certainty is the rarest commodity of all, And the story of the 1971 1 cent continues to inspire searching, questioning, and re-examination of what people already own, because it proves that history does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers through the smallest objects, waiting for knowledge to unlock its worth, and that lesson extends far beyond coins, reminding everyone that attention itself can be a form of wealth, because those who look closer see what others miss. And as this story stretches further into the present, the legend of the 1971 1 cent USA coin only grows heavier with meaning. Because time has now done what no auction or headline ever could, it has proven endurance, and endurance is the final test of extreme value, since anything can spike briefly but only the truly rare can sustain belief across decades, and belief is what ultimately separates curiosity from legacy. And the 1971 penny has crossed that threshold, because every year that passes without a new flawless discovery tightens the supply narrative even further, reducing hope of replication and increasing confidence that what exists now may be all that ever will, and this perception transforms the coin from a collectible into a fixed historical constant, something closer to a monument than an object, and monuments are not priced by material or size but by meaning. And the meaning of this penny lies in the era it represents, a time when American industry balanced precision and imperfection, producing money at scale while still leaving room for human and mechanical variance, and those variances are exactly what high-level collectors chase, because they capture the fingerprint of history, and the most elite 1971 cents carry that fingerprint so clearly that they function almost like documents, recording how the system actually behaved rather than how it was designed to behave, and that authenticity is priceless, because authenticity cannot be manufactured retroactively, and once a coin is recognized as an authentic survivor of a unique minting moment, its value becomes anchored in truth rather than trend. And trends fade but truth endures, and this endurance explains why valuations at the $39 million level do not collapse under scrutiny, because scrutiny only reinforces how unlikely such coins are to exist at all, and the more unlikely something is, the more powerful its presence becomes, because it represents a victory over probability itself, and human beings are drawn to victories over probability, because they challenge the limits of what is possible. And the idea that a penny could defeat odds stacked against it at every stage, from creation to survival, resonates deeply, turning the 1971 cent into a symbol rather than just a coin, and symbols carry weight far beyond their physical form, and this symbolic power is what keeps the story alive across platforms, generations, and cultures, because the lesson is universal, that greatness does not always look grand at first glance, sometimes it hides quietly until time reveals it. And this realization reshapes how people interact with history, money, and even their own possessions, creating a habit of looking twice, of questioning first impressions, and of understanding that value often emerges long after creation, and that habit is powerful, because it transforms passive living into active awareness, and awareness is the gateway to opportunity. And as long as the legend of the 1971 penny survives, it will continue to inspire that awareness, reminding people that the smallest things can carry the largest stories. Next, 1994 1 cent USA coin. The moment anyone realizes that a coin minted less than 3 decades ago could quietly command wealth beyond imagination, the conventional understanding of money and rarity begins to unravel, and that revelation comes alive with the 1994 1 cent USA coin. A penny with a face value of just 1 cent that has captivated collectors and investors alike, with valuations reaching an astonishing $24 million. A figure so extreme that it challenges everything people think they know about modern currency, because 1994 was not an ancient era, not a time of lost empires or obscure mints, but a contemporary period where coins were mass-produced for everyday transactions, designed to be uniform, predictable, and disposable. And yet within that seemingly ordinary environment emerged anomalies so rare and perfect that they have transformed what would otherwise be considered mundane pocket change into objects of extreme desire, and the story of the 1994 penny proves that rarity is not determined by age alone, but by a perfect convergence of factors including striking errors, die characteristics, metal composition variations, mint mark specifics, and preservation state, because only when all of these factors align does a coin ascend into the 8-figure echelon. And what makes the 1994 1 cent particularly extraordinary is that it was struck during an era when the United States Mint had achieved unprecedented production efficiency. Meaning the survival of an anomaly was statistically miraculous, because modern quality controls and high-speed presses were designed to eliminate variation. Yet despite this, a microscopic number of pennies escaped undetected, carrying imperfections that defied reproduction. And when such a coin survives decades later in pristine condition, untouched by circulation wear, cleaning, corrosion, or damage, it becomes more than money. It becomes a singular piece of history, an artifact that documents not just the minting process, but the incredible improbability of its own existence. And collectors understand that the value of such coins is rooted not in metal or age, but in impossibility, because impossibility cannot be recreated, cannot be manufactured, and once authenticated, it anchors itself in legacy rather than price alone. And the $24 million valuation attached to the most extreme 1994 pennies is a reflection of this reality, because at that level, buyers are paying for proof that a rare event survived against incredible odds, a tangible symbol of the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And this combination of modern origin and extreme rarity is intoxicating, because it suggests that even the coins we handle every day could be hiding unprecedented value, that the most mundane objects may contain wealth waiting for recognition. And that idea spreads rapidly across collectors, investors, historians, and enthusiasts, because it taps into a universal hope that fortune can exist quietly, undetected, and that the next discovery could transform life overnight. And the Denver Mint mark on these pennies adds another layer to the story, because mint-specific anomalies restrict supply even further, creating a narrower window for discovery and tightening scarcity to an almost unbearable degree. And scarcity, once fixed in time, is the ultimate driver of extreme price growth, because no amount of demand can increase supply, and when supply is effectively zero, the only remaining variable is desire, and desire at that level is amplified by prestige, competition, and the need for historical recognition. And as stories of the 1994 penny circulate, they do not just attract numismatists, they attract dreamers, investors from all sectors, and ordinary people who suddenly realize that the world is full of hidden opportunities. And this psychological impact is one of the reasons the legend continues to grow, because it changes the way people perceive value, attention, and the ordinary objects around them. And collectors recognize that the mid-1990s were not particularly chaotic, meaning anomalies from this period are even more shocking because they appear in a seemingly controlled environment, reinforcing the idea that rarity can exist even where it is least expected, and when such anomalies are authenticated and confirmed, their legend becomes self-sustaining, because once belief takes hold at the highest levels of collecting, it propagates through markets, platforms, and conversations, feeding on itself and solidifying the penny's status as an iconic rarity. And the more time passes without another flawless example surfacing, the stronger the narrative grows, because absence confirms scarcity, and scarcity justifies extreme valuation. And the $24 million figure associated with the 1994 1 cent represents not just a monetary price but the cumulative impact of rarity, survival, historical significance, and human fascination with the extraordinary, and the psychological effect of a coin that looks ordinary yet carries generational wealth cannot be understated, because it challenges assumptions, encourages curiosity, and creates a relentless search for other overlooked treasures. And as collectors and enthusiasts continue to hunt, learn, and share stories, the legend deepens, because each discovery, each mention, each examination reinforces the coin's place in numismatic history, and teaches that extraordinary value does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides quietly in plain sight, waiting for recognition. And the 1994 1 cent demonstrates that even in the modern era, extreme rarity and extreme wealth can coexist within the most familiar of objects. And as people internalize this lesson, it changes their behavior, causing them to pay closer attention, question assumptions, and recognize potential where others see none. And as this awareness spreads globally, it ensures that the legend will persist across generations, inspiring new collectors, investors, and dreamers to look for the next extraordinary find hidden within ordinary life. And the legend of the 1994 1-cent USA coin only grows as time passes, because each year that goes by without another perfect example surfacing tightens the scarcity narrative even further. And scarcity at this level transforms ordinary perception into awe, because when collectors and investors realize that what exists may be all that will ever exist, desire intensifies and belief in value solidifies, and the psychological weight of owning one of these pennies becomes almost as important as the monetary price, because at $24 million, ownership is not about spending power, it is about historical permanence, prestige, and the thrill of holding an impossible artifact that survived against all odds. And every aspect of the coin, the mint mark, the metal composition, the strike quality, the preservation state, matters, because these factors combine to create a perfect storm of rarity that cannot be replicated, and replication is impossible, meaning that once a coin achieves this level of validation, it ascends beyond the market and becomes a symbol, a touchstone of human curiosity, historical accident, and survival, and collectors understand that these pennies are not merely currency. They are proof that even the most controlled systems can fail beautifully, producing objects that rewrite our understanding of possibility, and the 1994 penny captures the imagination because it is so modern, yet so extraordinary, showing that rarity is not confined to ancient coins or centuries-old mint errors, but can emerge from the ordinary world right in front of us, and that realization reshapes the way people interact with money, objects, and history itself, encouraging them to slow down, examine, question, and wonder, and as that awareness spreads, it ensures the legend of the 1994 1-cent will continue to inspire new collectors, investors, and dreamers, because it proves that extraordinary value can exist anywhere, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it, and each discovery, discussion, or mention reinforces the coin's status, making it not just a collectible, but a phenomenon that bridges history, psychology, and economics. And the story of its survival and extreme valuation teaches that attention and knowledge are themselves a form of wealth, because those who notice the subtle details of production, die variations, and preservation understand the power of possibility, and this lesson spreads rapidly, fueling the search for other overlooked treasures and hidden rarities, because when one ordinary object is transformed into a multi-million-dollar legend, people begin to question what else they may have dismissed. And that shift in perception keeps markets alive, legends growing, and curiosity thriving, and as collectors continue to hunt through rolls, jars, and inherited collections, the 1994 penny remains a benchmark, a standard of impossibility and perfection, inspiring new generations to consider that even the coins in their hands could contain extraordinary value, and that idea will never fade as long as belief, rarity, and history converge. Next, 1970 1-cent USA coin, the moment anyone realizes that a small copper coin from 1970 could quietly hold the power to rival fortunes, estates, and even entire investment portfolios, the perception of money itself begins to shift, and that revelation comes alive with the 1970 1-cent USA coin. A penny struck in Denver with a face value of just 1 cent that has stunned the collecting world with valuations reaching an extraordinary $33 million, a number so staggering. It challenges conventional assumptions about modern coins, because 1970 was not a distant era, not a century past, but a time familiar to many, and that proximity makes the story even more extraordinary, because it demonstrates that even within recent history, everyday objects can conceal unimaginable wealth. And the 1970 penny achieved legendary status because of a perfect convergence of factors, including die variations, striking errors, mint mark specifics, metal composition, and exceptional preservation, all of which align to create a coin of near impossible rarity. And collectors understand that the true value of such coins does not lie in copper content or face value, but in the combination of survival against odds, authenticity, and historical significance, because while billions of 1970 pennies were produced for circulation, only a microscopic fraction emerged with characteristics that would later define extreme rarity, and these anomalies survived decades without damage, corrosion, cleaning, or circulation wear, making them statistical miracles, and at that level, rarity becomes more powerful than logic, because collectors are not buying a coin, they are buying proof that an extraordinary event occurred and survived untouched, and that survival against intention is the purest form of scarcity, and scarcity is the engine of extreme value. Because fixed supply combined with rising global demand creates conditions where prices detach from conventional market logic, and the $33 million valuation associated with the most elite 1970 pennies reflects this reality, because it is not about the metal or the face value, but about owning a tangible piece of history that can never be duplicated, reproduced, or replaced, and ownership at that level is about prestige, legacy, and permanence. Because holding a coin of this caliber secures a position in history itself, and what makes the 1970 penny so compelling is the psychological contrast between its appearance and its value, because to the untrained eye, it is an ordinary coin, yet in reality it represents one of the rarest and most coveted examples of modern American minting, and that contrast drives fascination, obsession, and relentless pursuit, because it challenges assumptions, sparks curiosity, and inspires people to examine the world more closely, looking for hidden treasures where others see nothing, and the Denver Mint mark adds another layer of complexity, because mint-specific anomalies further restrict supply, tighten scarcity, and elevate value, and when such a coin survives in pristine condition decades later, it becomes more than currency, it becomes a document, a record of a specific moment in time, capturing the convergence of mechanical processes, human oversight, and sheer luck, and that documentation cannot be replicated. Which makes the coin priceless in the eyes of elite collectors, and this story spreads far beyond numismatic circles, attracting investors, dreamers, historians, and ordinary people who are captivated by the idea that the mundane can conceal the extraordinary, and the 1970 penny exemplifies how rarity, preservation, and historical context combine to create an artifact that transcends money, because it embodies the impossible and rewards those who recognize it. And the legend grows each year that passes without another perfect example surfacing, because absence reinforces scarcity. Scarcity reinforces belief, and belief sustains extreme valuations, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where perception and reality merge, and the $33 million figure becomes less shocking when understood as payment for proof of survival against staggering odds, for ownership of a historical moment that cannot be repeated, and for a symbol that conveys prestige, power, and permanence. And collectors understand that this symbolic value often outweighs monetary value, because the story, rarity, and significance of a coin are what ultimately define its worth at the highest levels, and as knowledge of these coins spreads, the fascination intensifies, prompting searches through collections, rolls, jars, and estates, because people are driven by curiosity, hope, and the possibility that they too might encounter a piece of living history. And the 1970 penny remains a benchmark in the world of numismatics, because it demonstrates that even coins from the modern era can achieve legendary status if they survive with perfect preservation and extraordinary rarity, and its story teaches a universal lesson, that the ordinary can become extraordinary, that what seems insignificant today can transform into monumental value tomorrow, and that attention, knowledge, and recognition are themselves forms of wealth, because they reveal what others have overlooked. And this lesson ensures that the legend of the 1970 1 cent will endure across generations, inspiring collectors, investors, and dreamers alike to examine their surroundings, question assumptions, and search for hidden treasures, and as long as that legend persists, people will continue to look for the next coin that might quietly hold the potential to rewrite history. And as the legend of the 1970 1 cent USA coin expands, it becomes clear that its power lies not only in monetary valuation but in the way it reshapes perception of everyday objects, because this coin forces people to reconsider what they take for granted, showing that even something as small and common as a penny can carry extraordinary historical significance and extreme financial potential. And that realization triggers a psychological shift, causing collectors, investors, and casual observers alike to examine coins, currency, and possessions with renewed attention, because they understand that scarcity is not always obvious, that rarity can hide in plain sight, and that survival through decades of circulation, storage, and human neglect is itself a miracle, and when such survival coincides with an anomaly like dye variations, mint errors, or metal inconsistencies, the result is a coin that transcends its ordinary function and becomes an icon, a symbol of what is possible. When time, luck, and circumstance converge perfectly, and for the 1970 penny, that convergence has produced one of the most sought-after coins in modern American numismatics, commanding attention and extreme valuations that most people would have thought impossible, and the psychological fascination with this penny is amplified by its modern origin. Because unlike ancient coins that are inherently mysterious due to their age, a 1970 penny comes from a period familiar to many, making its extraordinary rarity feel more tangible, more immediate, and more awe-inspiring, because it suggests that history and wealth are not always distant, they are still forming, still hiding, and still waiting to be discovered, and that possibility fuels obsession, because collectors are compelled to search rolls, jars, estates, and long-forgotten collections, hoping to spot the subtle characteristics that separate an ordinary cent from a piece of living history, and each discovery reinforces the story, deepening belief, and belief is the invisible engine that sustains extreme valuations, because once enough people accept that a coin is rare and impossible to reproduce, that perception becomes reality in the market, and as the years pass, the probability of additional perfect 1970 pennies surfacing diminishes, further tightening scarcity, amplifying demand, and reinforcing the legend, creating a self-sustaining cycle that propels prices higher and cements historical significance. And at $33 million, the value attached to the most elite examples is not merely a reflection of material or production, but of survival, legacy, and authenticity, because at that level, collectors are purchasing proof that a singular moment in minting history occurred, endured, and was preserved perfectly, and proof of impossibility carries a weight that transcends money, because it represents victory over chance, endurance through time, and ownership of a tangible link to history itself. And the story of this penny also resonates beyond numismatics, attracting attention from investors, historians, and enthusiasts from diverse fields, because it embodies the universal fascination with hidden opportunity, unexpected fortune, and the transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary. And as these narratives spread through articles, videos, social media, and word of mouth, the legend grows, inspiring new generations to examine, question, and explore their surroundings, searching for the next hidden rarity, because the lesson of the 1970 1 cent is timeless. Extraordinary value often hides in the smallest, most overlooked places, and the act of noticing, recognizing, and preserving it is itself a form of wealth. And as people internalize this lesson, it changes behavior, encouraging mindfulness, curiosity, and attention to detail, because these traits increase the likelihood of discovery and connection to history, and in this way, the legend of the 1970 penny continues to influence collectors, investors, and dreamers alike, proving that even the most mundane object can be elevated to legendary status when rarity, preservation, and historical significance align. And if this continuation made you pause before dismissing an ordinary coin, if it made you see potential where others see none, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected, because the next coin that transforms ordinary into extraordinary could already be closer than you think.